All right, so picture this. It's 1896, middle of nowhere, Iowa. A farmer named John stands on his porch, staring at his broken plow sitting useless in the barn. The nearest town with a proper implement dealer, 30 miles away. That's a full day's journey by wagon, maybe more if the roads are bad. And they're always bad. He needs parts. He needs them now. Spring planting waits for no one. But here's the thing that really gets you. John has no idea what those parts should cost. The implement dealer in town, that guy knows John's desperate, knows he's got no other options, knows he can charge whatever he wants. And brother, he does. This was life for millions of American farmers in the late 1800s, isolated, exploited, trapped in a system designed to keep them that way. And then something arrived that would change everything. Not a new tractor, not some revolutionary farm machine. No, what changed American agriculture forever was something you could hold in your hands. 500 pages of possibility. The Sears, Roebuck and Company catalog. Now I know what you're thinking. A catalog? Really? That's the big revolution? Just stay with me here, because what happened next wasn't just about buying stuff through the mail. It was about breaking a monopoly that had choked rural America for generations. It was about information as power, and it was about one of the most audacious business gambits in American history. See, before we get to Sears, we need to understand just how bad things were for farmers. We're talking about the Gilded Age here. Cities are booming, factories are humming, railroads are connecting the coasts. But out in farm country, it's like living in a different century. Rural stores, they operated on what you might politely call the captive audience model. More accurately, highway robbery. Farmers needed credit to survive between harvests. Store owners knew this, so they extended credit, sure, but at interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. 30%, 40%, sometimes more. And the prices, oh man, the prices. A bolt that cost 5 cents in Chicago might cost a farmer 25 cents. Same bolt, same manufacturer, 5 times the price. Why? Because the farmer had exactly one store within reasonable traveling distance, and the store owner knew it. Farm equipment? Even worse. Implement dealers formed informal territories, unspoken agreements not to compete too hard. They'd all carry the same brands, all charge similar prices, all play the same game. A farmer looking to buy a new cultivator had all the negotiation power of a drowning man shopping for life preservers. But here's what really made the system work, what really kept farmers locked in. They had no information, no way to know what things actually cost, no way to compare prices, no leverage whatsoever. The implement dealer would show them a catalog from, say, John Deere or Moline Plow Company, point to a machine, quote a price, and the farmer had to either pay it or go without. There was no such thing as price shopping. You couldn't exactly hop on the internet and check, you know? The dealer's price was the only price that existed in your world. Now, mail order wasn't completely new in 1896. Montgomery Ward had started a catalog business back in 1872, aimed mostly for farmers and rural customers. It worked, but it stayed relatively small, focused mostly on general merchandise, clothing, household goods, that kind of thing. Aaron Montgomery Ward, the founder, he understood the farmer's plight. He'd grown up in rural New Jersey, worked as a traveling salesman, seen the exploitation firsthand. His catalog promised to sell directly to customers at wholesale prices, plus a small markup. Honest dealing, fair prices, a revolutionary concept. But Montgomery Ward's catalog, successful as it was, hadn't really cracked the farm equipment market, not in a big way. Sure, they sold some tools, some small implements, but the major equipment, the plows, the cultivators, the harvesting machines that could make or break a farming operation, that market remained firmly in the grip of the implement dealers. Then, in 1893, a guy named Richard Warren partnered with watchmaker Alva Curtis Roebuck. Sears had been running a small mail-order watch business. He understood the power of catalog sales, understood that rural customers, starved for options, would buy through the mail if someone offered them a better deal. The Sears, Roebuck and Company catalog started small, watches, jewelry, that kind of thing. But Richard Sears, he had bigger ambitions, much bigger. He looked at that Montgomery Ward catalog and thought, we can do this bigger, better, more comprehensive, we can become the place rural America turns to for everything. And I mean everything. By 1896, the Sears catalog had exploded to 500 pages. It sold clothing, furniture, tools, sporting goods, musical instruments, baby carriages, books, patent medicines of dubious effectiveness. Basically, if you could ship it, Sears would sell it. But Richard Sears understood something crucial, something that would make his company not just successful, but transformative for American agriculture. He understood that farmers weren't just looking for low prices. They were looking for information, for transparency, for the feeling that they weren't being cheated every time they needed to buy something. So the Sears catalog didn't just list products and prices. It explained things in detail, sometimes excruciating detail. The catalog would describe exactly what a product was made of, how it was constructed, how it compared to similar products. It would show illustrations, sometimes multiple views. It would provide testimonials from satisfied customers. And here's the really brilliant part. It would often explain why Sears could sell something cheaper than local retailers. They'd break down the economics, show the markup chain, demonstrate that their business model, selling direct and buying in volume, allowed them to undercut the middlemen. This transparency, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, farmers had information. They could compare. They could make informed decisions. They could, for the first time, understand whether their local store was being fair or gouging them. And brother, the local stores did not like this. Not one bit.
So, the war was on. And make no mistake, this was war. Economic warfare between the old guard implement dealers and general stores on one side and this upstart mail-order house in Chicago on the other. Local merchants saw the Sears catalog as an existential threat, and they weren't wrong, because once farmers started comparing prices, well, the game was over. The margins these dealers had been enjoying couldn't be justified, not even close. A lantern that cost 75 cents at the local store? 42 cents in the Sears catalog. Same manufacturer, same model. A farmer could see it right there on the page. Farm tools? Even more dramatic. A quality hay fork that might cost $1.50 locally, Sears sold it for 85 cents. A post hole digger? $3 at the implement dealer, $1.75 from Sears. On and went. Now, dealers fought back. Oh, they fought, in ways that were sometimes clever, often desperate, and occasionally downright petty. Some stores refused to serve customers they knew were buying from Sears. You ordered a new harrow from that Chicago catalog? Fine, don't come crying to me when you need credit for seed next spring. Others organized public catalog burnings. No, I'm serious. They'd hold community events, encourage people to bring their Sears catalogs and burn them in bonfires. Made quite the spectacle, apparently. Drew crowds. Probably sold some lemonade and made speeches about supporting local business and keeping money in the community. Preachers got involved. Some ministers preached sermons about the moral duty to support your neighbors, not some faceless corporation in the big city. The fact that Sears was owned by actual people with names, and that faceless corporation described the implement manufacturers everyone was already buying from, well, that irony seemed to escape notice. Newspapers ran editorials decrying mail-order houses as parasites draining wealth from local communities. They published calculations showing how much money was leaving town through catalog sales. They interviewed tearful store owners facing bankruptcy. And you know what? Some of this wasn't entirely unfair. Local stores did provide credit. They did extend trust to farmers in hard times. They were part of the community fabric in ways a catalog couldn't be. But here's what the dealers couldn't answer, what they never quite could justify. Why were their prices so much higher? If they were providing valuable service, if the credit and local presence were worth something, fine, charge a premium. But 5 times the price? 3 times? Even double? Farmers were doing the math, and the math was brutal. A farmer who spent, say, $500 a year at local stores and implement dealers, that same farmer might spend $300 through Sears for equivalent goods. $200 saved. That might not sound like much today, but in 1900, that was real money. That could be the difference between making ends meet and losing the farm. So despite the pressure, despite the social stigma some communities tried to attach to catalog buying, farmers kept ordering. The catalogs kept arriving and Sears kept growing. By 1900, the Sears catalog was over 1,000 pages. It had become the most widely distributed publication in America except for the Bible. Farmers called it the Farmer's Bible or the Consumer's Bible. In some rural homes, the only books you'd find were an actual Bible and the Sears catalog. Kids grew up studying it like some kind of wish book, fantasizing about all the things they might someday own. Wives used it to stay current with fashion trends, even if they couldn't afford to order much. Men used it to educate themselves about tools and equipment, even if they ended up buying locally. But Sears didn't stop at just selling general merchandise. Richard Sears looked at the farm equipment market, saw the margins those implement dealers were enjoying, and thought, yeah, we can crack that too. Starting in the late 1990s, Sears began offering more and more farm-specific equipment, not just hand tools anymore. We're talking about substantial machinery. Cream separators, churns, feed grinders, windmills, water pumps, fencing materials, harnesses, eventually even larger implements like cultivators, planters, and mowers. Now, Sears wasn't manufacturing this stuff themselves, not at first anyway. They were doing what they did best, acting as middlemen, but more efficient middlemen. They'd contract with established manufacturers to produce equipment under the Sears brand or under house brands that Sears controlled. And here's where it gets interesting, because Sears didn't just slap their name on existing products. They actually worked with manufacturers to simplify designs, reduce costs, and improve quality control. They understood volume manufacturing. They understood that if you could standardize components and reduce the number of parts, you could make things cheaper without sacrificing quality. Take cream separators, for example. These were crucial pieces of equipment for dairy farmers. They separated the cream from milk, allowing farmers to make butter and sell the cream at premium prices. A good separator could make the difference between a profitable dairy operation and a marginal one. Implement dealers sold cream separators for anywhere from $30 to $60, depending on capacity. They'd represent established brands like DeLave, tell farmers these were the only ones worth buying, the only ones that would last. Sears looked at the separator market and saw opportunity. They contracted with manufacturers to produce separators to their specifications, then sold them for $15 to $25, half the price or less. Were they as good as the top-end DeLaves? Honestly, probably not. The cream separation might not be quite as complete. The bearings might not last as long. But here's the thing, they were good enough. For a farmer who couldn't afford $60 but could swing $20, a Sears separator that worked pretty well for 5 years was infinitely better than no separator at all. And that's what Sears understood. That's what made them so dangerous to the established order. They weren't trying to sell the absolute best. They were trying to sell good enough at a price farmers could actually afford.
Now, 1908, this is when things get really interesting. Because in 1908, Sears made a move that shocked the entire farm equipment industry. They started selling houses, complete houses, through the mail. I know, that sounds insane, but stick with me because this connects to the farming story in ways that aren't immediately obvious. The Sears Modern Homes program sold entire house kits, everything you needed to build a house. Lumber, pre-cut and ready to assemble, nails, paint, shingles, windows, doors, even plumbing and heating systems if you wanted. It all arrived by railroad boxcar, as many as 30,000 pieces, each one numbered and labeled. You'd get a 75-page instruction book, and if you could read and had some basic carpentry skills, you could build yourself a house. A good house, not some shack. We're talking about proper 2-story homes, bungalows, farmhouses with modern amenities. And the price? A fraction of what a contractor would charge. A house that might cost $3,000 to build conventionally, Sears sold you the kit for $700 to $1,500, depending on the model. Thousands of farmers bought these house kits. They'd gather family and neighbors, stage a good old-fashioned barn raising, except it was a house raising, and in a few weeks, they'd have a modern home. Indoor plumbing, electric lighting if you had access to power, proper insulation, built to actual engineering standards. But here's why this matters for farming.
The Sears Modern Homes program taught the company how to handle really complicated logistics, how to ship enormous volumes of materials, how to coordinate manufacturing across multiple suppliers, how to provide clear instructions for assembly to customers who might not have technical expertise. All of those lessons they applied directly to selling farm equipment. By 1910, Sears was selling tractors, actual tractors, through the mail. Now, these early tractors weren't like modern farm tractors. We're talking about big, heavy, slow machines, steam-powered at first, then gasoline. They were expensive, even from Sears, but they represented mechanization. They represented freedom from horsepower, which meant freedom from constantly needing to grow hay and oats to feed your draft animals. Sears didn't manufacture these tractors themselves initially. They partnered with existing tractor makers, buying machines in volume and reselling them at reduced margins. But they also began to push for design improvements. See, early tractors, they were nightmares to maintain. Every manufacturer used proprietary parts. A broken gear or bearing might take weeks to replace, and you'd have to order directly from the manufacturer, pay their prices, wait for shipping. If you lived in rural Montana or Kansas, by the time the part arrived, the planting or harvest season might be over. Sears pushed manufacturers towards standardization. Use standard bearings, use standard bolts, make parts interchangeable where possible, and stock those parts in the Sears distribution system so farmers could order them through the catalog and get them quickly. This was revolutionary, the idea that a farmer could maintain a complex machine without being held hostage by the original manufacturer. That had implications far beyond just Sears. But tractors were expensive. Most farmers still couldn't afford them. So Sears focused on the equipment they could afford, the implements that might cost $50, $100, $200, the stuff that would actually reach the mass market. Plows, cultivators, harrows, mowers, rakes, corn shellers, feed grinders, all of it sold through the catalog at prices that undercut implement dealers by 30, 40, sometimes 50%. And Sears didn't just sell the equipment, they educated farmers about it. The catalog descriptions would explain what different implements were for, how to choose the right size, how to maintain them. For farmers who'd never had access to this kind of information, it was like taking a correspondence course in modern agriculture. Let me give you a specific example: disc harrows. These are implements pulled behind horses or tractors with rows of concave discs that break up soil, chop up crop residue, prepare fields for planting. Critical equipment. An implement dealer might stock 1 or 2 sizes of disc harrow, both from the same manufacturer. If they didn't fit your needs exactly, tough luck. Either make it work or don't buy. The Sears catalog in 1915 listed 12 different disc harrow configurations: single action, double action, different disc sizes, different widths, different weight classes, each one carefully described, with illustrations, with explanations of what soil types and conditions each was best for. A farmer could study that catalog, figure out exactly what would work for his land and his horses, then order it with confidence and pay 40% less than the implement dealer was charging for fewer options. This is what broke the dealer's grip on the market. Not just lower prices, information plus lower prices, options plus lower prices. By 1920, something like 30% of farm equipment was sold in America coming through mail order catalogs, with Sears capturing the largest share. Implement dealers were still in business, but they'd been forced to compete, forced to justify their prices, forced to provide better service. Some dealers actually became Sears agents, ordering equipment through the catalog and reselling it locally with a small markup. If you can't beat them, join them, right? But Sears wasn't done innovating. In the early 1920s, they made another audacious move. They started offering credit, real credit, installment payment plans. Buy a cream separator for $25, pay $5 down, then $5 for 4 months. Buy a cultivator for $80, pay $10 down, then small monthly payments. This was huge. Remember, access to credit was one of the main things keeping farmers tied to local merchants. Well, now Sears could offer credit too. Better credit, with clearer terms, lower interest rates, and without the personal entanglements and pressure that came with owing money to someone you saw at church every Sunday. The impact on rural America, it's hard to overstate. We're talking about millions of farmers who suddenly had access to equipment, to technology, to improvements they couldn't have afforded otherwise. Farms became more productive. Farmers could expand operations, try new crops, adopt new techniques.
But nothing lasts forever, and by the late 1920s, things were starting to change in ways that would eventually undermine the whole catalog model. Cars, trucks, better roads, rural electrification, the telephone, all of these things were breaking down the isolation that had made mail-order catalogs so revolutionary in the first place. A farmer with a Model T Ford and a decent road to town, he wasn't trapped anymore. He could drive 20, 30, 40 miles if he needed to, could shop around, could compare prices in person at multiple stores. The implement dealers, bloodied but not beaten, started fighting back more effectively. They couldn't compete on price for simple tools and basic equipment, but they could compete on service, on expertise, on being there when something went wrong. See, a disc harrow ordered from Sears would arrive and it would work fine, until something broke. Then you'd have to diagnose the problem yourself, figure out what part you needed, order it from Sears, wait for it to arrive. If you guessed wrong about what was broken, you'd have to order again, wait again. An implement dealer could look at your broken harrow and know immediately what was wrong, could probably fix it that day, or at worst, order the part and have it in a few days. For increasingly complex equipment, that service was worth something. Tractors especially. As tractors became more common and more sophisticated through the 1920s and 30s, they needed professional maintenance. Timing adjustments, carburetor tuning, transmission work. This wasn't stuff most farmers could handle themselves, at least not easily. Implement dealers pivoted. They became service centers. They trained mechanics. They stocked parts. They built relationships with the major tractor manufacturers like International Harvester, John Deere, Alice Chalmers, and they argued with some justice that buying from them meant buying into a support ecosystem. Sears tried to keep up. They opened retail stores, starting in the mid-1920s. The stores sold catalog items, but also provided places where farmers could see equipment in person, talk to salespeople, get advice. By 1930, there were 300 Sears retail stores across America. But the retail stores created a contradiction. If you're operating stores with overhead and staff, you can't undercut local dealers by 40% anymore. Your costs are similar to theirs. Your advantage is narrow. And then, of course, came the Great Depression, 1929 through the late 1930s. Agriculture collapsed. Crop prices fell through the floor. The Dust Bowl devastated the Great Plains. Farmers went bankrupt by the tens of thousands, lost their land, their equipment, their livelihoods. Sears survived the Depression, but they came out of it changed. Less focused on rural America, more focused on suburban America. The catalog continued, sure, but it was increasingly aimed at town dwellers, at middle-class families buying appliances and furniture and clothing. World War II brought a temporary boom as farmers scrambled to increase production for the war effort. But after the war, the trends that had started in the 20s accelerated. Better roads, more cars, television spreading consumerism and brand consciousness, suburbs exploding around every city. By the 1950s, the farm population was shrinking. Mechanization meant fewer farmers could produce more food. Young people were leaving for cities, for factory jobs that paid better and didn't require owning land and equipment. Sears recognized reality. The future wasn't in rural America anymore. It was in suburban shopping centers, in department stores anchoring new malls, in appliances for modern kitchens and tools for weekend hobbyists. The farm equipment section of the catalog shrank, then shrank more. By the 1960s, it was a shadow of what it had been. Sears still sold some farm supplies, but the days of undercutting implement dealers on major equipment were over. And yet, the dealers who survived, they never forgot what Sears had done to them. They never forgot that customers, given information and alternatives, would demand fair prices and good service. The most successful dealers adapted. They became transparent about pricing. They competed on service and expertise, rather than just trying to extract maximum profit from captive customers. They built relationships based on value, not exploitation.
In a weird way, Sears made the implement business better by forcing it to compete. The dealers who thrived after the catalog era were the ones that treated customers fairly, who provided genuine value, who earned loyalty rather than demanding it through geographic monopoly. But for Sears itself, the story doesn't end well. The company that had revolutionized American retail, that had broken monopolies and empowered consumers, struggled to adapt to the next wave of retail innovation. Discount stores like Walmart and Target beat them on price. Specialty retailers beat them on selection. The catalog, which had once been revolutionary, became obsolete in the age of internet shopping. In 2018, Sears filed for bankruptcy. The catalog had been discontinued in 1993. The retail stores closed one by one, then in waves, until almost none remained. So here we are, 2025. Sears is basically gone. The catalog is a historical artifact. And yet you can still see its influence everywhere in American agriculture, everywhere in retail, everywhere in how we think about buying and selling. That transparency Sears pioneered, that expectation that you should be able to compare prices, read detailed specifications, make informed decisions, that's just how commerce works now. We take it for granted, but it wasn't always that way. Before Sears, before Montgomery Ward, before mail-order catalogs brought information to rural America, consumers were largely helpless. Merchants controlled the information, they controlled the prices, they controlled access. The catalog broke that control. It proved that given information and alternatives, ordinary people could make smart decisions. It proved that competition benefited consumers. It proved that you didn't need to accept exploitation just because you lived somewhere remote. Modern farming, it's unrecognizable compared to 1896. Farms are larger, vastly more productive, operated by a tiny fraction of the population. GPS-guided tractors, precision agriculture, automated everything. A farmer today might manage thousands of acres with equipment that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yet, that farmer is shopping online, comparing prices, reading reviews, making informed decisions about equipment purchases. They're ordering parts through dealer websites or directly from manufacturers. They're watching YouTube videos about maintenance and repairs. They're participating in online forums where farmers share information and advice. They're doing, in essence, what the Sears catalog made possible over a century ago, using information and access to break down barriers and make better decisions. The implement dealers, they're still around, the ones who survived. John Deere, Case IH, Kubota, New Holland, these companies operate dealer networks that provide sales and service, but they compete in a landscape where customers have options, information, and power. No dealer today could get away with charging 5 times the fair price because they're the only store within a day's travel. Customers would just order online, or drive farther, or buy used equipment from another farmer. The geographic monopolies are gone forever. And credit? Farmers have options there too. Banks, credit unions, manufacturing financing, equipment leasing. The days when you had to borrow from the local store owner at usurious rates, locked in by poverty and isolation, those days are done. The Sears catalog didn't just change farming. It changed the entire relationship between consumers and sellers. It proved that middlemen who didn't provide real value could be bypassed. It proved that efficiency and volume could overcome traditional margins. It proved that trusting customers with information worked better than keeping them ignorant. Amazon didn't invent this model. They refined it. They took the mail-order catalog and moved it online, added sophisticated logistics, and scaled it to levels Richard Sears couldn't have imagined. But the core idea, direct selling, low prices, detailed information, customer empowerment, that was the Sears catalog model. Every time you compare prices online, you're doing what farmers did with those catalogs. Every time you read reviews and specifications before buying, you're using the same information-based decision-making that broke the implement dealer's monopoly. Every time you click Buy Now and have something shipped to your door, you're participating in the direct-to-consumer revolution that started with a catalog mailed to farmhouses in the 1890s. There is something bittersweet about Sears's decline and fall. They revolutionized retail, then failed to adapt when retail revolutionized again. They proved that no advantage lasts forever, that today's innovation becomes tomorrow's obsolete business model. But their impact? That's permanent. The idea that consumers deserve fair prices, honest information, and real choices, that came from companies like Sears who proved it could work, who proved it could work profitably, who proved that treating customers well was actually the best business strategy. Walk through a modern farm today, look at the equipment, the productivity, the technology, then try to do all that with horses and hand tools, buying every piece of equipment from a single dealer who controlled your access and charged whatever they wanted. The distance between those two worlds, a lot of different innovations made that journey possible. Tractors, certainly, hybrid seeds, chemical fertilizers, irrigation, genetics, but also information. Access, the breaking of monopolies that kept farmers trapped and exploited. A catalog did that, a thick book of pages filled with products and prices and descriptions mailed to millions of farmhouses, year after year, decade after decade. It seems almost impossible that something so simple could matter so much, but it did. It really did. And the next time you're ordering something online, comparing prices, reading reviews, making informed decisions, maybe take a second to think about those farmers on their porches, studying their catalogs by lamplight, dreaming of equipment they couldn't afford, and then realizing they actually could. That's where this all started, with information, with access, with the radical idea that ordinary people deserved both.